Well, let's get started. Hey, thanks everybody for coming. My name is Matt Fox, and I am the VP of Product and Engineering here at TopLeft. Hey, this is going to be the first of 4 sessions where we're talking about how to do Agile in an MSP, and especially like why you would even want to do that. I know, like obviously there's a lot of different levels of familiarity that you all have with Agile, and some would know why you would want to do this. Like, what problems does agile ways of working solve, and what benefits might you expect when you try it? So we're going to talk about all of that from, especially starting in this session, we're going to be talking about um, the very basics. This is the introduction. So we'll talk about the basics of agile ways of working and Kanban and such, specifically for MSPs, and especially in the other sessions coming up, we'll start talking about going into more detail into um, how does an MSP specifically work in an agile way. So yeah, I'll talk about the other sessions coming up. Now, just before we get started, could you all put in the chat here in Zoom, type in your name and your location and what company you're from, and then just briefly what your role is, or what your title is, so I can get an idea of who we got here and what places and what companies and so on. We are recording it. I think. Let me just check that. Yeah, we're recording it. So the recordings will be available for people who miss it as well. But yeah, this is definitely going to be. This is meant to be very interactive. Like we're not super formal around these places, and yeah, so we'd love to just kind of shout out questions. In fact, if you can turn on your any cameras that you got, that would be great. We do love to see a smile. This isn't a webinar. This is a meeting where we can see each other and ask questions. And hey, if someone wants to contribute an answer, then that's great too. You are more than welcome to interrupt me with questions, or put them in the chat. I'll try to keep my eye on that from time to time, and yeah, get your questions answered. Also, later in the session, I'll ask for a volunteer to show some of their Kanban boards, and we'll go through that and review that. It'll be a little free little review for you as we go and talk about some of the topics that and recommendations that we have. So, hey, Lynn, thanks for going on the camera there. Hey, welcome, Daryl. Oh, that's why. Wait, no. Yeah, welcome, Scott and Noor. So, yeah, everybody there from First Focus in Australia. Appreciate y'all coming. Lots of project managers there. I see. That's good. Very good. We will definitely get into some of the specific project management stuff. I think that comes mostly in the third session, although there's definitely a lot of stuff that's relevant in the second session too. But this session, we're going to be laying a groundwork so that you'll be able to talk about like why are the agile ways of doing some of these things superior to what you might do if you're, I don't know, like for example, if you just followed everything that ConnectWise said to do, or Autotask said to do, or whatever, what MSPs traditionally do, and some of the problems it leads to. Okay, so I will, yeah, I might go kind of alternate between sharing the screen and not sharing the screen as well, bit by bit here. So take a look at this, and then I'll stop sharing my screen. So this is, if you might recognize, this is a Kanban board. This is essentially here the simplest Kanban board you could possibly have. So it has columns here that represent the stages of the work: to do, doing, done. Like it's almost the simplest workflow that you could have. And the cards that appear on these boards they represent an element of work. So, like in the MSP world, typically that would be a ticket, like could be a project task. It could be a whole top level project as well, or if you're doing the sales side, it could also show up. It could be like an opportunity or whatever. So this is the most basic Kanban board that you can have. I just want to do that to introduce kind of. So you've all seen basic Kanban board at the beginning. But before I go into that, I just want to explain a little bit about the background of like what is TopLeft and where did it come from? And why do we know what we're talking about? So TopLeft comes out of an MSP based near Vancouver, Canada. It's known as Kirchhoff Technologies, and that's been around since 2007. We also have a different brand called Crafty Penguins, and that is an MSP that's focused on like Linux and cloud services, things like that. And I've been with Kirchhoff Tech and the associated companies since 2010 or so. Since then I've been involved in a large number of IT projects, also like service delivery and do like tech support for an SD-WAN product, and yeah, doing lots of various project and service work here at the company. And so what we're going to be teaching here is, some what we've learned from a bit of study and quite a bit of practice here at Kirchhoff Tech. Now, just a little bit more background there, like what led Kirchhoff Tech to get into like the agile side for MSP work is some of the problems that we had. Like towards the beginning, there were some definite problems that Kirchhoff Tech had in running their help desk and projects. Like as an example, we had like 400 open tickets with just 10 engineers. Like that's a lot for 10 techs. The technicians always felt overwhelmed. There was always lots to do, but it was unclear what sort of stuff was important. It took way too long to close the tickets. Also, the technicians would kind of cherry pick the tickets that they wanted to do, and so the tickets that just nobody wanted to do they just get ignored until the customer complained about it. I mean, that's another problem. Is customers would feel neglected. You might have heard, hey, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and when customers learn that they just got to bother you to get their stuff done, well, then they will, but that's a very bad experience for the customers. Another problem was that just everybody felt siloed. Like everybody's kind of working on their own thing. There's not a lot of teamwork, and so it wasn't. Yeah, there's some big problems there. So um, we had used Kanban and some agile techniques in our software development because we also did some software development as well. And in that environment, agile techniques were already well accepted. So we thought, well, there's probably not any real reason that we can't use some of those same techniques to run the MSP side, the help desk and the project and whatnot. So we did. We started doing that, and yeah, did find a lot of success from that. And that's kind of where TopLeft came from, because to do that sort of thing, you really need Kanban boards to show your tickets and projects and whatnot. And there was nothing at all, so we built the first versions of TopLeft, which didn't even go by the TopLeft name at the time. But that's where it came from, and now obviously we're offering it to other people in the MSP industry who have the same problems, which is quite a few. So that's where it came from. Now, if you haven't heard about Kanban before, it might feel like it's a brand new thing, but actually it's not. It's pretty well established. It goes back to some ideas coming out of like Toyota automobile manufacturing in the 1940s. It's this ideas about work having to do with like efficiency, reducing waste, and representing work visually. And that's actually what Kanban, or I think if you're going to do it more the Japanese way, it's like Kanban. The kan means visual, and the ban means card, right? So it's kind of literally that's what a Kanban board is. One of the key elements of that thinking is that we don't want to manage the workers. What we manage instead is the work, because either one will get the work done. But if you focus on the work will move more efficiently rather than just focusing on what the workers are doing all the time. So that's one of the, if I could summarize it in just a single sentence, that would be how I would summarize it, is kind of the shift in thinking from managing the work instead of managing the workers. Another way that some people have said it is it's oriented towards pulling work rather than pushing work. That would be where the workers have freedom to pull work to themselves when they're ready for new work, rather than just getting it always pushed on them whether they're ready for it or not. As I mentioned, that's widely adopted in software development now, and it is becoming more well known in a variety of industries, IT included. So so why would you do this? Like, what are some of the benefits? Well, one benefit is that you can see your work in progress. I'll talk quite a bit about work in progress today. It has its, you just call it WIP or WIP. We are with a Kanban board, we're able to see the work in progress, and then we're able to limit it. I'll explain why it's important to do that later. What that lets you do is be a lot more responsive to your customers, give them a lot, they get a lot better experience from working with you when you're more responsive to them. You can stop work from falling through the cracks. I know that's a problem when you're just looking at your work in ConnectWise or Autotask. You can really improve the flow of your work by identifying bottlenecks, like things that kind of slow down your work over and over and over again. You can identify those things and then address those problems. address those problems. It can really help you to stop feeling overwhelmed, because now you have a place where you can see all your work, you can see what's important, you can see what's the problem work, and if you can see it, you can manage it. So it helps people not feel overwhelmed. It's great for communicating with your team because you got one good visual place to see all the work, talk about it. So those are just some of the benefits that you would get, people get when they use Kanban boards, especially TopLeft Kanban boards if you're using ConnectWise. Okay, so back to my slides here. So what are some of the principles there with Kanban? A couple of things here. One would be, in Kanban, we like to teach to start with what you do now. So that would be things like, since we're in the domain talking about like visualizing work, that would mean the first thing that you do is you visualize the work. And by that, I mean, you put it on a Kanban board somehow. Then you use that visualization to understand better what's actually going on with your work and then improve your practices. So we're not talking about just throwing away all of your practices all on day one and replacing it with something new. No, that's too big. That rarely works. Even if it can be made to work, it's really risky and it's going to be 10 times as much work as you think it is. So we're going to just start small. Okay, start with what you do now. Second thing is related. We pursue improvements through incremental change. Like I said, we change one thing at a time and see how it improves our system of work. And then a third Kanban principle is we look at acts of leadership at every level. What I mean there is everybody on the team has a different perspective on how the workflow is working for the team. A manager is going to have one perspective based on his or her needs to manage that work. A senior engineer is going to have another perspective based on his or her needs. And a junior engineer is going to have a different perspective as well. And each perspective is valuable. And so we expect everybody to contribute and say, when we work this way, this part's really good, this part's not so good. And all of that contributes to how we make changes to improve things for everybody in our workflow. It's definitely not supposed to be the sort of thing where managers just kind of sit down, think for a while about what needs to change, and then just push it out to everybody and say, "Hey, this is a new way that we're going to work." That's not what this is about. Okay, some of the practices, things that actually happen here when you're doing Kanban stuff is we visualize the work. So talked about that already. We put it on a Kanban board. Second thing, we manage the flow of the work, and that is where you take your visualization and then you start to think, okay, how is the work actually progressing from stage to stage, or specifically speaking on the Kanban board, how is it progressing from one column to the next? Thinking about how that works and how that could be improved. Third thing there is limiting work in progress, as I've already mentioned, and we'll get more into that later as well. Also, explicit policies and regular feedback loops, so that we learn quickly. We don't just sit down every couple of months and talk about how this could be improved. No, we do that a lot more frequently so that we can learn faster. We can try more things. And this list here is going to structure a lot of the rest of the session here today. So I'll be talking about more about a lot of those things. By the way, some of these items are just from this website there on that link, agilealliance.org, just so you can see, this isn't stuff that we've just made up here at TopLeft or Kirchhoff Technologies or whatever. Like, this is all well accepted stuff, and there's a lot more that you can learn about it too. Like, we really are just gonna touch the surface of a lot of these things. If you want to go deeper into some of the stuff, definitely you can. But one of the benefits that we're bringing is specifically talking about MSPs. So the way that we're going to talk about this is in 4 sessions. Okay, one is we're just going to have the introduction to being agile in an MSP. That's today's session. Second session, we're going to be talking more about agile service delivery, so specifically help desk stuff. Then we're going to talk about the project management side. And I do want to mention a lot of the project management stuff actually depends on the stuff in the second session having to do with service delivery, because project management has a lot of this. I'd say it's like a superset of what needs to be done in the help desk. Like, it includes everything in a help desk and more, because it involves a lot of the planning stuff, which help desk doesn't. Help desk is mainly reactive, so it doesn't require all that planning element. But in terms of like actually getting those tickets done, assigning them, and making sure that they get done and that they flow well, project management includes all of that as well. So um, that's why, yeah, a lot of the stuff for project management, it's important to understand what's offered there in the service delivery part as well. Finally, in the 4th session, we're going to talk about how do the engineers work. We're going to go into a lot of detail about how do the engineers work, and we'll also talk about something called specialized workflows. So that'll be really useful for anybody who wants to go deeper into that. You can make certain ways of working. You can make a lot more efficient by having a what we call a specialized workflow set up there. Okay. I think I'm not going to go through all of the learning outcomes there. Now, by the way, anybody who's joined recently after the introduction, go ahead and type in your name in the chat there, both your name, your location, your company, and your job title too, so we know who's here. Um, and then also, if you came in late, just know, hey, you can shout out your questions or put them in the chat. I'll try to check on that from time to time. You know what? As far as the learning outcomes go, maybe I will just briefly talk about that. So what do we want to do here in the first session? Okay, talk about identifying the stages in a workflow, work in progress, why that kills productivity, a daily team meeting we're going to talk about. Second session is we're going to talk about how to use Kanban methods for triage and dispatch, identifying and fixing problematic service tickets. On the third session, we're going to talk about handling a whole project portfolio. And the last session, we'll talk about like how do you actually do the daily work, especially from an engineer's perspective, according to Kanban principles on a Kanban board. And we'll talk about the specialized workflows and examples of that. And we'll also talk about some metrics and ways to actually monitor and measure the work that you're doing that are available with TopLeft, including some integrations into third-party products that are a powerful way of doing that. Okay, now just as a note as to like what are we not doing here? As I said, we are just touching the surface, but we are of like overall Agile and Kanban training, but we are going to go deep in some areas, specifically where you need it for an MSP, because we're an MSP and we know how it works. So we are going to do that. It is by no means going to be just good Agile training for anybody at all. Definitely going to be focused on the MSP industry. You're more than welcome to go to like Kanban.university. Like, that's just one of many places that offer more detailed Kanban training if you want to go deeper. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what are some of the problems that you might want to solve here. Like, why are you here? Why are you using TopLeft? I just want to hear. You can put it in the chat if you want, but probably even better if you just go off mute and just shout it out from your shout it out here. What problems are you experiencing that you think Kanban might help with? Like, first of all, maybe mention, are we looking more like project versus help desk or something else, like maybe software development? And then what would be the, what was a specific problem that you're experiencing that you'd like help with?
I think it's about being efficient. Um, for us, we get a service person or a dispatcher, and then they seem to be the bottleneck. Whereas if you're doing agile, then you got everybody, uh, doing something, doing the work. So being more efficient.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I know that we have been able to save people a lot of time on save their dispatchers specifically a lot of time, because actually we'll talk about that later in this session about how much time it can take a dispatcher to do some of the things that are necessary depending on what way you're working, and we can just make that work go away in certain ways of agile working. Okay, yeah, great.
Yeah, we actually no longer have a dispatcher.
Okay, that's the best case. Very good. All right, who else? Some sort of problems that you'd like to solve?
Yeah, I think one of our main focuses at First Focus is, especially around projects, is really uh, meet, meeting budgets, so your actual versus budgets, and bringing that number down. So I think we're really trying to find new methodologies around that and ways to assist us with doing that.
Okay. Okay, very good. Yeah, and the ways that agile working can help with that are by, well, one of the ways I should say is by helping to make sure that you're always splitting up that work in a project into the right size bits and pieces. And when you do that, it's you're able to know earlier when some of the work is going off the rails, and then you can address that earlier, so that you don't get kind of like, 3/4 of the way through your project, and you've taken up all of your budget on the project and you only just learned about it yesterday, right? Could still be that there are sometimes problems, but you learn about them much sooner, so that if it can be resolved, then you can resolve it early, and then that's a great way to start meeting those budgets
Mhm.
more of the time. Anybody else?
I put mine in the chat box, so it's besides what Scott mentioned, there's also adherence to tasks or keeping, engineers accountable for deliverables, keeping WIP on track, and then also managing resources. So, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I don't find that our technicians are like purposely sitting around or bored or being lazy. I just genuinely find that it's hard for them to know what to do next. And if you read the workbook, Making Work Visible, it's that it's the process and the time to comb through tickets, figure out what to do next, etc. It creates a traffic jam. It's just so inefficient. Whereas if technicians knew, hey, I don't have to think that hard. I just know what to do next, that their productivity is just going to shoot through the roof.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it takes a surprising amount of mental energy as a technician to keep track of what's going on and what's the most important. If you don't have a good system to make sure they're aware of that, right? It can be super simple, but if you just use the tools that you get out of ConnectWise or Autotask, which are not great for that sort of thing, then it can be very stressful and take a lot of their energy, as opposed to their energy going into solving customers' problems, which they would rather do. Absolutely, like you're totally right. They don't want to be sitting around not working on the right thing, but need decent tools for that. Okay, hey, very good. Yeah, thanks for sharing some of those problems. Appreciate that. I think probably everybody understands that we've all come from some of the same places. Okay. now just keep your eyes here. Well, you know what? I'm just gonna, yeah, remind you here the basic Kanban board. Here, let me comment on that. So like one of the first practice there that I mentioned in terms of like what are the agile or Kanban practices was visualizing work. Okay, so what is the point of a Kanban board, and what like how does that meet the requirements of visualizing work, and what are the benefits? Well, let me talk about that a little bit. So one is you would have noticed the kind of the key thing on the Kanban board is the columns. Okay, so that defines the status of the work, as I said before, where they move specifically, they move from the left side of the board to the right side of the board as the work progresses. So you can really, oh, and then each card represents the work that is in each of those stages. So um, it can answer some questions about your work, the sort of questions that you'd have all the time. It answers it very, very simply. Like one example would be considering any particular stage of my workflow, that would be like one particular column on a Kanban board. What work is in that stage? So that would be something like what are all my in-progress tickets in my help desk, or what are the tickets in my project team that are in a backlog? You know, they're ready to be started, but they haven't been started yet. So answering questions like that, which is a pretty common question to have. Another one would be instead of looking at multiple work items, it would be considering a single work item. Like, so considering a certain ticket, where was that again? What stage is it in? And it can be easier to answer that sort of question as well from a Kanban board when you can just, you know, glance at the board and you notice a certain type of ticket, or not a certain type of ticket, but actually a specific ticket that you're wondering about. What stages is in? You can even just sometimes glance at it and know, okay, it's on the left side of the board or it's on the right side of the board. It tells you something about what stage of the work that it's in. Then considering not a particular ticket or the tickets that are in a particular stage, but considering if you want to compare the stages of your work against other stages, you might be wondering, okay, what stage of my work has the most work in it? That would be from a Kanban board perspective, which column has the most cards in it? Because that is key for thinking about the bottlenecks in your team. Like, where does the work, like maybe the work kind of consistently progresses up to a certain point and then it falters. You know, like we're getting a lot of tickets that are sort of neglected when they get to a certain stage. And the Kanban board is really good at answering that sort of question too. And by the way, you can do a lot of that stuff just with you know, like sticky notes on a whiteboard, right? You don't need anything. You don't need anything particularly fancy to do that. I know people have just put sticky notes on a whiteboard or a wall and got a lot of success out of that. Now, obviously, that's not going to work for you when you've got all your work in ConnectWise or Autotask or whatever. But you know, you don't need anything fancy to get those sorts of benefits. I will mention though that um, you know, with TopLeft, which is showing you the same work that you already have recorded in your PSA, TopLeft can also help you know like which work items are getting stalled. That is, like they get up to a certain point in your workflow and then they stop there for whatever reason. It can highlight those so that you can see specifically, okay, here is a problem ticket. You can also split it up into what we call swim lanes. So those are the horizontal lanes. So compared to like the vertical columns, which represent the stage of the work, you can also split them up into groups horizontally, and that would be group them. Actually, it's kind of TopLeft is configurable. There's a variety of options. You can do it like by per project or by who's assigned to the work, so that you can see within those groups where where do you have more work than in other groups. For example, which engineers have way more work than other engineers would be a specific example of that. So TopLeft's really good at that as well. So, and you know, just think about that, how that compares to what you get with your if you just are looking at work in your PSA in ConnectWise or Autotask. You know, you usually are just looking at a big list of tickets. It doesn't do a lot of work to highlight them or group them in the way that, you know, the engineers need or the managers need. You know, maybe if you have projects, you can look at it in a work breakdown structure. It's a little bit better than just a list, maybe a Gantt chart, but still those are still pretty rudimentary ways of looking at that. So there are better ways now. That is what we're teaching. Okay. So as we get into talking a little bit about the workflows, let me just explain a little bit about that. So the second Kanban practice was considering the flow of the work. So I want to just compare that to some of the flows that you already know. And later in the session, I'll talk a bit about comparing it with what the flows that MSPs typically use. But here I'll tell you like what are the two main methods that people use. So one is just consider how work flows in like a grocery store. So I don't know if this is how they do it in Australia, but here in Canada, you're in your grocery store. When you're ready to check out with your cart, you would usually see they have more than one checkout counter, and you just pick which one you want to go to. You line up, and eventually you get served. Okay, so that's just a queue of work. If you have to get into a lineup, you're in essentially a queue of work, and each one gets served one after the other. So that is a common way of working, and that's actually applicable to how MSPs work as well. You could put a queue of work for a technician so that they know, hey, when they're finished working on whatever ticket they're working on now, where do they find the next work? Okay, so that's one way to work. Compare that though with like a dentist office where all of the work is scheduled, right? You don't ever go into a dentist office and just line up for service. No, you always get scheduled in there. And that's because, well, I don't know exactly why. I'm not a dentist, but they prepare. They need to know who's coming because they need to know how long things are going to take. Maybe the dentist needs to be dedicated to a certain patient for a period of time. Like there's a lot more coordination that goes on in a dentist office than at a grocery store. So for that reason, they schedule you out. Now, the reasoning that what I want you to understand about that is that both methods are fine, but what the right one to use at a certain time depends on what the customer needs. And so how that actually applies in an MSP is a lot of MSPs have come out of using like calendaring scheduling. Like they want to book up the engineer's time. They want to book out an engineer, book their calendar out, 80% of the day or 90% of the day or whatever, so that an engineer supposedly knows exactly what they're doing throughout the whole day, right? But that is the thinking that has to do with managing the workers and not the work. But we'd rather, like if you're doing agile, instead, we're going to be thinking about managing the work and not the workers. That means that if also consider that if a customer doesn't really care when the work gets done, I mean, other than, hey, as soon as possible, but if they don't care about whatever particular time of day it gets done, then you should be using more of a queue of work. If a customer does care about what particular time and day work gets done, then go ahead and schedule it, like a dentist office, for example. So an MSP, a customer at an MSP might care exactly when something is going to get done if they're expecting you to come on site. Or maybe if you're doing something that's going to cause an outage of some service and you told them it was going to happen at 5 p.m. on such and such a day, well then, yeah, okay, they're expecting it. Go ahead, put it in the calendar. As opposed to what, probably is the majority of the work in an MSP a lot of the time is just, the customer doesn't really care, just get it done. So an MSP is going to use both methods. How many of you have ever heard of ConnectWise? They have a principle that says paint your calendar green.
Yeah.
Anybody heard of that?
Yeah, of course. Green by 5. Yep.
Yeah. So that's what they're talking about when they say that, like have a dispatcher who scheduled out your engineers the whole day green, right? If you're done that, or paint, I mean, maybe their term is like paint tomorrow green, meaning you should have your engineers scheduled out for tomorrow all the time.
By 5 o'clock.
Basically, that's what we're advocating against that. I would not suggest you do that. That has a few problems, which we'll get to. Okay, so I want to go a little bit more detail here, just briefly, into examples of the stages of work at an MSP. Okay, so the stages of work, that's the same as the columns on a Kanban board, and kind of thinking about the possible statuses that you'll find your tickets in. So, pretty typical for an MSP. One is the new status. Okay, tickets start out there, usually whether it's service or help desk, they'll start out in new. Then they have ready. Okay, that means it's probably gone through some sort of triage or project planning. Basically, it's ready for a technician to work on. Waiting would be where the next step to do on the ticket is responsibility of somebody outside of the team, typically the customer, but it could also be a vendor or whatever. It could be the postal service delivering something. Basically, it's not waiting for your team at all. Typically, your PSA, you'll have multiple different waiting statuses in your PSA. Another one is scheduled. So that means that the next step happens at a known time in the future. Okay, right now, there's nothing to do. The next step on that work is going to happen at a certain time in the future. Then there's in progress. And that means that a technician has started the ticket and then finally, obviously, completed, like that one. So a couple things just to note about that. A lot of these stages are based on what's the next step towards the completion. Basically, whose responsibility is that next step? Okay, like for example, if it's new, next step is probably a dispatcher, unless you don't need a dispatcher anymore, in which case maybe you have the technicians watching for the tickets there. In any case, it's for somebody to pick up that work and to have a quick first look at it. Ready would be if it's gone through the next step would be for the engineer to actually start on it. Waiting, next step is for somebody outside of the team to do something. So a lot of these are kind of based on who's got the next step on that work. I wanted to note something too about the difference between like in progress and like starting the work. What a lot of people think that the most important thing to know about the in progress work is basically like being able to know exactly what a technician is working on at that point in time. And that's not actually true. That's not the most important thing about that. And sometimes sometimes that is important for people to know, but it's not the most important thing to know. What we really want to know about in progress are all of the things that the technician has started but hasn't finished yet, which ideally should be only one thing. Okay, that's the work in progress, and so that's what we want to minimize. What I mean is, if an engineer has basically like started on 5 things and hasn't, those are the 5 things that they haven't been finished. They're not waiting on anybody else. Like, the engineer goes in the morning, he could pick up any 5 things he or she's already started. Let's keep all those things in progress, even though they're not really in progress, because I mean, he shouldn't be working on 5 things literally at the same time. But what's really important to know is all the things that the engineer has started. And if naming it in progress bothers you, then go ahead and name it started, right? That's totally fine. Another thing finally to note about this is that these are fairly generic statuses, like new, ready, waiting, scheduled, in progress, completed. Those are about as generic as you can get. Like any MSP can use that for almost any workflow. So that's fine to use, and every MSP uses that. I'll contrast though that with what I already mentioned about some specialized workflows where you can actually get very specific about what are the stages of some particular type of work, and then you can maybe your statuses or your columns on the Kanban board would be named much more specifically to that kind of work. And we'll go into that more in the last session. Okay, now going into a little bit more detail here, a lot of these stages, we can classify them into different types of stages. So one type would be a queue. Okay, so that's where the work is ready and we're just waiting for a worker to do it. It hasn't yet been started. Then there's waiting. Okay, that's something that's blocked outside of the team. So it could be, like I said, the customer, could be a vendor. It could be waiting on a different team in the company, in the same company as well. Scheduled, that's happening in the future. Started, work has been started but not yet finished. And then finally complete. Okay, so those are kind of the main types of stages that we can have. And I tell you that in order to just make sure that you're kind of aware of a couple of, well, yeah, there's a couple things to be aware of. They're not things that you typically think about in terms of your stages, but hey, we're getting kind of, this is training about the agile stuff, so we want to get into this, make sure that you understand. So now let's go through and actually categorize these typical statuses. Okay, so new, that would be a queue, right? Because we are waiting for a dispatcher to work on that. If it's ready, that would also be a queue. That's a type of that work there because is waiting for an engineer to work on. Then waiting, okay, obviously that's a waiting status, or as I mentioned, you might have multiple waiting statuses. Then we have scheduled. Okay, scheduled in progress is started and completed is completed. Now, okay, you might be thinking what's the point of that, Matt? They're just kind of named after their type, mostly, except for these two queues. And actually, that's where I want to bring your attention to, is that there's a queue followed by another queue here, which kind of doesn't really make sense. What would be the point of having a queue followed by another queue? Like what would be the point of the first queue at all? Um, my what I, the detail that I want to bring to your attention here is that this is kind of simplified. If we wanted to represent everything that was actually happening here, we'd actually have another status in here, maybe called like being dispatched or something, where like here in new, it's kind of waiting for a dispatcher. Then in kind of this invisible stage that we don't typically have here, would be being dispatched. And if a dispatcher was going to be very precise about everything that they were doing, when they begin to dispatch a ticket, they would put it into the being dispatched status. And then once they dispatch it, maybe they put it out to an assigned or like the ready status, which is another queue, right? Because it doesn't really make sense to have a queue followed by another queue. Now, what I mentioned that for is just to say, like, because dispatching only takes a few minutes usually, it's not supposed to be a big practice. We would usually just simplify it and not represent that here. I mean, and most of the time you only have at the most, a single dispatcher anyway, so you don't really have to worry about coordinating that work among multiple dispatchers. So it's fine. They're usually just going to leave it in the new status while they do that work and bump it straight over into ready. So this is kind of an oversimplification. We don't actually have everything represented here that we actually do, but that's okay. Like I said, in Kanban, we just kind of we start out with what we're doing now, we don't want to make it too complicated. And as long as it works for you, then that's the key concern. We don't need to actually represent every single thing that we do here. Okay, so now I want to start talking about WIP, work in progress. And why do we want to minimize it? Now, this is going to be, I think, one of the most important bits of what we talk about here in this session. Because I'll be honest, like this is one of the key sort of aha moments that I had when I was learning about agile things. It was like when I first understood it, I was like, oh wow, that finally makes sense. Why do we want to keep work in progress low? So let's consider the effort that you put into a ticket over time as your engineers work on a ticket. So if you consider a single ticket here, okay, time is progressing, and here on this axis is the effort that the engineer puts into time. Well, as time progresses, the effort progresses, okay? So the effort's compared to time is pretty linear. That's from the experience of your team, from your engineers, okay? But that's not what your customer experiences. When the customer is considering the value that they get out of the work that your engineer is doing, that value is delivered all at once, all at the very end. What I mean is like a 50% complete ticket is of zero value to your customer. They haven't got their problem solved at all yet. It's kind of, I mean, if you considered a big project like building a house or something, let's say, a house that is half finished can't be half lived in, right? A house that's half finished can not be lived in at all. It has to get basically totally complete before you can begin living in it. And tickets are basically the same thing. All that value is delivered to the customer all at the end. And this is a key reason that we want to limit the work in progress. Because obviously we're not just working at a single ticket over time. Let's consider a more regular experience here where we're working on multiple tickets throughout a day. So consider that maybe this is a single day from an engineer's perspective. So an engineer is working on multiple tickets throughout the day. Their effort that they put into the tickets is linear throughout the day, whether they're working on a small work in progress or a large work in progress, okay? However, if they're working on a small, like one ticket at a time, where they work here on one ticket, they deliver all the value for that ticket. They work on another ticket, deliver the value, and so on through the end of the day, okay? The customers are getting that value delivered to them pretty regularly, whether it's the same customer or different customers. But if they're working on a whole bunch of things all throughout the day, just going back and forth between one thing, never really finishing up anything until the very end, then the value delivered to the customer looks more like this. Okay, they got no value delivered to the customer for a good part of the day until at the very end, all of a sudden they start finishing up those tickets, and they do sort of catch up in the end. But there's a long time throughout the day where the engineers could have, the customers could have had value delivered to them, but they didn't because of the way that the engineer was working. So it's a big gap there between the effort and the value delivered. It's also kind of unpredictable. Right here, when you're working on one ticket on a time, small work in progress, like it's fairly predictable. The engineers, delivering value throughout the day. Whereas with a large work in progress, it's very unpredictable. If you're like the service delivery manager or a project manager, you don't know when they're going to be finished with any particular ticket because they're just always working on stuff. They're not delivering much until the very end. So that's one way to describe some of the benefits of keeping your work in progress minimized rather than going ahead and working on all sorts of things all at once. Okay, here's another way to put it. So this one is out of the Phoenix Project. You may have heard of that book. It's pretty well known. It describes, it's a, what do they call it? A fable. It's like a novel almost, but it teaches a lesson for the IT industry. Definitely should pick up a copy of that if you haven't read it yet. It touches on a whole variety of topics having to do with efficiency and working well. This I yanked from the back of the book there. It is a description of kind of what happens to your work as your workers get busier. So what this is saying here basically is if your engineers are just always constantly working on stuff, like they're utilized 100%, then the time that they take to finish any particular ticket is going to be really, really high. So if you could say, like, if an engineer has some spare time, like they're not always just totally flat out working on the main thing that they have to be working on, then they're going to be able to get to any work that you throw at them. They're going to be able to get to that pretty quickly. So that represents here, the percentage that they are busy. It's pretty reasonable. There's not a lot of big increase here up until like 70, 80, 90% of their time that they're busy. But after, starting at kind of 70, 80%, the time that it takes for the work to get done goes up a lot. It doesn't just go up bit by bit. It actually increases substantially. So one way to say that is like the more busy you are with the larger number of work items that you've started, the more of them are just kind of waiting around, not progressing at all. So their wait time increases despite like the actual working time remains constant, right? The nature of the work doesn't change. It's always going to take an hour to do a 1 hour ticket, but there's a big difference in your customer's experience when there's, that 1 hour ticket can be done today because your engineer's not that busy compared to if the engineer's just super busy and it takes until next week to get that 1 hour ticket done. Big difference in your customers' experience there. Now, since I'm talking to computing professionals, I'll point out that you might recognize this. This is actually the same exact sort of thing that happens with like a busy CPU or a busy network interface, for example. In fact, I've seen this in like the networking domain where the latency of a packet that you're sending through an interface is let's say it's quite reasonable. It's totally, like along the baseline, as long as the network interface is only running at 70, 80, maybe up to 90% utilization. But as it gets beyond that, the latency of that packet you want to send it increases by magnitudes. It doesn't just increase a little bit, it increases a lot. So if you've ever experienced that in your journey as an IT technician or anything like that, then this is basically the exact same thing, just in a human perspective. Any questions about that? I know it's kind of maybe a bit more thinking than you were thinking you were going to do today. But like, what do you think about that? What sort of questions do you have about any of that? Someone's chatting. Let me pull up the chat here. Oh yeah, Justin mentions the audiobook of Phoenix Project. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the only way I got my guys to listen to it or understand it.
Yeah.
Most people don't read anymore. But yeah, I think traffic jam is just traffic in general is just shows you that that what happens when you just have too much whip.
Mm-hmm. Yes, traffic on a road is exactly like this as well. A road can handle, up to maybe 70 or 80% of its kind of max capacity, and everything is just flowing along really well. Get to 90%, more than that, it just slows right down. And you can see that every day in a city. Yeah, this there's a lot of things in the world that are like this, and it has to do with like you also said, maybe like being busy versus being productive. We want to make sure that we are working efficiently because there's a difference between what your customers experience versus what the technicians experience, and we're out here to make the customers happy, which in turn also makes the engineers happy as well. It's not like we're asking them to just brute force their way through it and work longer days, right? We're talking about working smarter, which everybody likes. Okay. Yeah, if anybody has any questions about that, just do interrupt me again. Okay, so let's go back and talk about a couple of different like how does the WIP grow? How does work in progress typically grow in an MSP? Well, it's because there's two common management methods that we've seen here, and at Kirchhoff Tech we used one of these as well. So one is what I call the free-for-all method. That's where the techs just kind of manage everything themselves. They just don't have a whole lot of framework. They haven't really been taught how to do that. Just how here's your tickets, deal with them, and that's where you get the cherry picking and especially like the just tickets that nobody wants to do. They just kind of fall between the cracks. Okay, the other method is like the calendar scheduling, or what ConnectWise says, paint tomorrow green or whatever. I like to call it Tetris mode because it has to do with like slotting um, slotting a certain type of size of work into just the right spot in a calendar, um, and doing it over and over. So I call it Tetris mode. So how do each of those result in higher work in progress? Well, yeah, as I mentioned, work in progress when you're just doing free for all mode, cherry picking. Also, just the kind of tendency to value starting more than finishing, because engineers want to be seen as responsive to the customers, and they like to say, hey, be able to say to the customer, hey, I've started your ticket. Well, that's, you'd expect that to make the customer happy. So we like to say, we've started your ticket, rather than understanding what I had described before, where what the customers really want is to hear, hey, I've finished your ticket. So valuing starting more than finishing is how work in progress increases in a free-for-all environment. In Tetris scheduling, though, let's talk about this. That's like the calendar, or paint your day green. That's when you try to fit the right size work into the right size spaces. So like this is the plan, right? I think you've all seen this. If you have a ticket, let's say you've got 3 tickets, you think they're going to take an hour each. Okay, yeah, you just schedule them back to back. 1 hour for ticket A, 1 for ticket B, 1 for ticket C. Okay, in theory, it's fine. The reality frequently differs from the plan, though. Is that like here's a very potential reality: is that ticket A is not 1 hour. Ticket A turns out to be 1.5 hours. And so it only finishes here halfway into the slot for ticket B. So what happens when this happens? Well, when the engineer has a decision to make when they get to this start time for ticket B. They can either keep working on ticket A and just finish it up. That means in that case, they can't work on ticket B anymore, because now they got to be ready to start ticket C in an hour. So they have to tell the dispatcher, sorry, I couldn't do ticket B. That means ticket B needs to be rescheduled. So it's just extra work for the dispatcher. It's waste. Or they can actually obey the calendar and say, I'm not done ticket A, but the calendar says to work on ticket B. So they leave ticket A unfinished. Then they still have to tell the dispatcher, I didn't finish working on ticket A. Can you please put that back in the calendar? And, I mean, they could still have the same problem with ticket B too. Ticket B takes longer than expected. So that is quite frequent in the Tetris scheduling mode. And that's one way that the work in progress increases with that mode, is because here you might have something that you've started but not finished when you run out of time, and it's got to be put back on the calendar in the next available spot. So a couple of ways there that work in progress tends to increase depending on old ways of working. Okay. Yeah, back to some of the Kanban practices. Here I had talked about explicit policies. So in a Kanban environment, like a specific example would be having simple documentation that we keep up to date. We're not talking about having a whole handbook about having to do this, 30 pages, every single detail documented. We don't necessarily need that. Like if that's how it ends up after years of growing and just refining your practices, okay. Although still, I think that'd be a lot. But we're not going to do that out of the gate. We want just whatever, document key things. And it is important to have them have them documented, because we need to be efficient. For example, when you hire a new person, you don't want to just have to tell them everything just as like the legendary team knowledge or whatever. We do want it written down. But we want to keep it simple, just what's really necessary, and also kept up to date, because the only thing worse than no documentation is documentation that nobody trusts because nobody updates it. So that's good from a Kanban perspective. Also, I had mentioned feedback loops. So that's where we just have some proactive activities for improvement. And so that could be anything from like a daily huddle. I'll talk more about that just very shortly here. We also would want to be monitoring certain metrics about our work and having a weekly review meeting. You might get together week by week and just talk about how the work has gone and think about how you can do it better. So those are good practices to build into your team to make sure that you are have effective ways to get everybody's feedback and to apply it. Okay. So yeah, let's talk about specifically how would you visualize a work with TopLeft. So I wanted to mention these are some of the recommended boards that we have for different kinds of teams. So for a board with a help desk, if you're a help desk team, then we recommend two types of boards. So a board with a member swim lane, and I mean, I'm not even really going into much detail here in the columns that you'd want, but specifically one would have a member swim lane, and that would be really useful for the managers or dispatchers in the team, for them to see how the work is assigned to the different engineers in your team. Also, it's really useful for meetings like the daily huddle that I'll talk about momentarily. Also a board with no swim lane. That's where all the work is grouped together, but the technicians would use that board without a swim lane. They would just click the little My Tickets button in the top menu, and then it would just show them their own work. That would give them a really focused view of the work that they're doing without any distractions, so they can see just what they're responsible for. Then, okay, so a board for project management, if that's what you're doing in your team, then we recommend a few other boards. So one is a project board, and that is where the board shows the whole project portfolio, all the top level projects that the teams are working on. Then we have a board with a project swim lane, and that is also useful for managers and also for technicians. They can use that to just look at the project work that they're working on. Also a board with a member swim lane. Again, that's useful for managers who are concerned about how the work is distributed among the different members of the team. Very similar to this first board here in the help desk area. And then finally, a board with a phase swim lane. And that is used for drilling down into a single project from this project, this whole project portfolio board. So that's how we use that. Now, I did want to mention, we have documentation about all of these in our knowledge base. That's at help.topleft.team. In fact, there's a video of me kind of explaining in detail how you'd actually go about making each of these boards. That's all in the knowledge base. Also, for existing customers of TopLeft, you can, if you're an administrator, you can click on the boards menu, go down to the bottom there, it says add board. On the add board page, there's a bit of description of each of these, and then a link to that knowledge base page where there's a lot more detail and the videos of me explaining it. So that's where you can make sure that, you can review that and make sure that you've got all of the recommended boards set up. Now, I just wanted to go through a quick exercise. Actually, another slide before I do that. In particular, there's a couple of ways that TopLeft can really help with maintaining the flow. One is you want to use a status age warning where you can, that'll help you identify that stalled work. So that gives you a warning on something like this, where if you have a ticket that's been, for example, in progress for a week, okay, that's probably a concern. That would be too long. So it can highlight it in red here, and that gives you a really clear indicator for what are those problem tickets that have been stalled. Also, you can apply work in progress limits, which are warnings that tell you when a particular person has too much work. It doesn't have to be a particular person, but that's how it's typically used. So that would give you something like this, where if someone has too many tickets in progress, it gives it like a red background here. Whereas if someone has is kind of within the limits that you specify, then it gives them a green background where it counts the number of tickets that they have. And then again, that's just another good visual indicator of where the problems are in your work, which helps you focus your efforts in fixing that sort of stuff. Okay, so that would be for those who are TopLeft customers already, that would be what we'd recommend that you check. Like, do you have the recommended boards? Do you have meaningful columns? And have you made use of the status warnings and the whip warnings and other such things? Is there anybody who would like to volunteer to bring up one of their TopLeft boards where we could do a quick check in that regard? While someone's thinking about that, Justin, you mentioned you don't use TopLeft, how to visualize the boards, and you asked how to visualize these boards and swim lanes without it using ConnectWise Manage. Well, that's kind of the trouble, is that ConnectWise doesn't really have a good way to do it. There's sometimes some reports that you can go out of your way to build that can bring up the list of tickets that have been sitting in certain statuses for too long, but that has a couple of disadvantages. One is that you can't one is, I think, well, first of all, you got to go out of your way to make those reports. And then the second is that you got to go out of your way to look at them anytime you actually want to see that. Whereas with Kanban, it's all just presented there, like in the same place that you're looking at all of your work, you can get warnings about those particular ones. So yeah, any volunteers? If not, I do have a couple of my own boards that I can bring up, but does anybody want to show their boards, and I can take a quick look at it? All right, well, if there's no takers, that's fine. I know some of that data is sometimes kind of private, have your customer names and such in it, that's fine. So let me just bring up one of my examples here. This is one of our demo boards. Let me just give you a quick example. So, one thing that we look at here are what are the columns that we have. So this is a board that's showing us the tickets that we have in ConnectWise. The columns are pretty similar. I think actually identical to some of those example columns that I had mentioned before. So we got a new column, we've got a ready column, scheduled tickets, we got waiting tickets, in progress, and finally we got completed. And this one in particular is the one that has the member swim lane. So when I've said member swim lane, that's specifically what this. Oh, actually, it's not. This one does have a swim lane, but it is. It looks like it's by the company. So this one is not the one for dispatching the work. It's fine to use this as a company swim lane. Then we can see, for example, like for this particular company, we've got 5 tickets for them. For this company, we've got quite a few additional tickets. So that's fine. That one would serve the same purpose, I think, as the board without the member swim lane. Like, for example, if I was a technician, I could just click my tickets here, and then I'd see just the work that's assigned to me. I'd still see them by the company, since it's using the company swim lane. And yeah, those columns are pretty typical. They look good. Here is a ticket that's being warned about. It's been in progress for 6 days, so I do get the warning here, and it also does look like I'm using the work in progress warnings here. Yeah, because I see the green background on this one and a red background on this one, so I am using work in progress. So that looks decent. Let me just go over to this one here. This would be the member swim lane. Yeah, here we go. So this is kind of a similar board, but it's kind of switched up here. It's not grouping them by the company anymore. It's grouping them by the member. And so this one would satisfy that recommended board that I mentioned, where we have the member swim lane, so that people who are responsible for just how the work is distributed in the team have a good place to see that. So I can see here tickets that aren't assigned to anybody. By the way, this may be where the dispatcher works out of, the new column and the no resources assigned swim lane. Okay, these are new tickets that have come up. They might also be concerned about tickets that are in progress that say they have nobody assigned. That would be unusual. That's probably some sort of problem there. You might want to look at that. But after that, we get swim lanes for each of the members of the team. So we got Joseph, we got Nicole, Greg's work here. So and so on for every member of the team. So it's really easy to see how the work is distributed in the team and if any changes need to be made. By the way, in top left here, if you want to reassign the work, you can actually just drag a ticket from one swim lane to another, drop it there, and it will go and reassign that work in ConnectWise or Autotask. And as far as the statuses and the other uses of those features we go, we got, they look okay. New, ready, scheduled, waiting, progress completed. Yeah, pretty typical. And yeah, we are using the WIP limits and the warnings about that. So looks like we got the keyboards here. Okay, we are kind of coming to the end here. The daily meeting, I think, is kind of the last topic here. I know we've been going a little while now. Appreciate y'all staying around. Daily meeting is really is a really key thing. I think that every team that wants to adopt Agile techniques ought to be doing a daily meeting. Like, actually, I don't even know why it's kind of associated with Agile stuff. Like, it would be a good technique, a good thing to do, to just keep on top of your work, even if you don't know anything about Agile at all. It's been really an improvement for our teams as we've used them. And I would institute a daily meeting in any team that I was a part of. Other people call them a stand-up or a huddle or a scrum. Sometimes there's a few names for them. So how do you do that? One is you want to get your team together as a whole team, maybe up to 10 people. 10 people would be kind of on the high side anyway, but you want to get everybody on the team together. It's got to be really short, like 5 or 10 minutes. We're not talking about a long meeting by any means. You want to have it at the same time every morning, typically, when everybody's expected to be in. Also, you don't wait for stragglers. Like, if you say it's at 9, you start it at 9 every day. As people who typically straggle in at the end, well, they'll learn that they're going to miss stuff unless they're on time. And you put it in the calendar. So that's just some of the expectations you can set if that's the sort of meeting that you want to have in your team. The reason to do this is just because, well, I'll explain a little bit more about what you actually talk about, but it's just a good way to get unblocked in your team as soon as possible. Like, if you don't have a time to actually talk as a team at least once a day, then some people will just kind of wait on their problems and wait until someone offers help, or wait until they've got more than one thing that's a problem. Like, it's just, I mean, that's not a good practice, but it just tends to be. But if there's a time at least once a day where the expectation is that you bring up any of your troubles, then people will take advantage of that, and that limits the time that you can have problems without somebody getting help. So it's the fastest way to get work unblocked. Show of hands, who's already doing a daily meeting of any kind in your teams? Shout it out if you are. Anybody? Yeah, Lynn, I see that hand. Okay. All right. You can put it in the chat too if you see it. So at least one person. Definitely, yeah, you want to be doing that. So a couple of more tips about how to do that. you're going to use, for TopLeft, you're going to use the member swim lane board, the one that I had just shown you there, where each member gets their own swim lane. It goes, yeah, it makes it really easy to go through each member of your team. They can mention what they're working on, what trouble that they're having with any tickets and so on. So if you're all in the office, you're going to put it on the biggest screen that you have. It's better to have, you know, like a big wall monitor if you have that, than gather everybody around just a regular screen. But I mean, if that's the best you got, then go ahead and do that. If you do have a remote team, then go ahead and just put it on the screen. Do screen sharing so everybody can see it. Each member is just going to briefly share what they're expecting to work on today and any impediments to any work, where they need help or where they might need any clarification. You know, if it's like a tier 1 technician, just a junior person, and they just work through their list of tickets, they might just say, you know what, I'm just working through the queue and I don't need any help right now. And that's totally fine, right? We don't need them to go and list out all the things they might work on today if they just work on the queue of tickets. If it's more of a senior person and they're probably doing more kind of project or planned work, then they'll probably share a little bit more about what they're planning to do that day. Anybody who misses the stand up, you know, because that can happen, just personal reasons or traffic jam or whatever, set the expectation that if they miss the huddle, then they should, and then they get into work later, they should post a little update about it in a team chat. I assume you've all got some sort of team chat tool, but just post a little update about that in the team chat if you missed the huddle. And really important for running the daily meeting is staying on topic. Someone in the team needs to be responsible for redirecting any sort of off-topic chit chat to follow-up meetings immediately after. The most common problem is that somebody goes into a bit too much detail in some problem that they're having or some help that they need. If it's not really relevant to everybody, then just set the expectation that it's not rude. Like someone's gonna interrupt you if you do too much detail. That's not rude. That's just so that everybody can keep going and we can keep it to a manageable meeting. That sort of thing is totally applicable for a little, maybe just two of you need to get together at the end of the meeting for a little second meeting about that particular topic. You can go into as much detail as you need to, but it might be too much detail for the meeting with everybody, and that's fine. Does anybody have fully remote teams right now? Like my team is fully remote. I work from home. Does anybody else have fully remote teams? Okay. For anybody who does, I would actually kind of relax what I had said about like just staying on topic. For a remote team, personally, I would maybe not be quite so strict about that, because you don't probably see, okay, Justin says they're fully remote. I would say, because your team doesn't see the other members of the team throughout the day, um, like the daily huddle might be the only time that everybody talks to each other throughout a day. So a little bit of chit chat is okay. Like that can actually be helpful for just building some camaraderie and talking about personal stuff or whatever. But the point is, it does need to stay focused. You cannot have this team, this call grow to like 15 minutes or 20 or 25. Like sometimes it's okay if it starts out at 15, maybe 20 at the very most when you're just figuring it out. But you should pretty quickly be able to bring it under about 10 minutes, because if it gets longer than 10 minutes, then your engineers are going to be like, you know what, most of this call is not relevant to me, and the call is the problem. You definitely don't want that. So definitely, I would say pretty hard max, at least regularly, 10 minutes. Yeah, if there's exceptions and it goes longer, that's okay. But definitely regularly keep it to 10 minutes or less. And if you got to be strict about what's on topic and not on topic, then that's fine. Okay, so your homework is to now review your Kanban boards. Okay, I had given you a little bit of an example there. Review your Kanban boards. Make sure you got our recommendations. Make sure you're using you got the right columns. You're using the key features there to help you find the problem work. Also start, or maybe if you're already doing a daily huddle, then improve it based on what I've seen, what I've mentioned here. And that'll be your homework for this week. Next session, we are going to start talking about specifics of the triage and dispatch in an agile environment. That would have to do with things like I very briefly mentioned before, like the grocery store queue versus the dentist office, and fixing the problem tickets. identifying those tickets and fixing them. So that's what we'll talk about next session. So that was the introduction to Kanban for the MSPs. I think we did specify this as a 90-minute call, so I got another 15 minutes or so for questions and answers. I think for next session, we'll keep the teaching part a little bit shorter, and we will start out, I think, with some time just kind of ask how things went with what did you learn today? How have you applied that in the week to come? And so we'll talk about that at the beginning. So just be aware. I want you to be actually doing those things, and you can bring your feedback. And then we'll do the teaching, and then have more time for Q&A. So that'll be the format for the following weeks. Anyway, time for Q&A now, as long as you want to stick around. One thing I'll just start here with Justin. You had mentioned the I like. Oh, hang on, where'd my chat window go? Justin, you wrote, I like the idea of a daily meeting, but X minutes times X, Y employees can add up. I don't see the value, but I could be wrong. Well, Justin, maybe you are one of the small fractions of MSPs who's never had a technician waste an entire day on something that they should have known was not an issue. But most MSPs have experienced that before, where you've got some technician who's like spent an entire day on something they didn't need to do, and like it was like literally like a 30-second conversation with some senior engineer or somebody who was more familiar with the project or the customer or whatever, and if it had only come out, they would have saved themselves an entire day. So Justin, you are right that X minutes times Y employees can add up. It definitely can. And in acknowledging that, that's why I say you need to keep it short, right? Because I have heard of MSPs, they're like, yeah, we run a 45-minute stand-up every day. I'm like,
Yeah,
are
that's
you kidding me?
much.
Yeah, that is absolutely way too much. Like your team is going to hate that, and justifiably so. So that's why we got to keep it short, and 10 minutes. 10 minutes is short. And by the way, like you don't need to use 10 minutes. Like my team's pretty small right now. And so we usually do it 5 minutes. And that's with us not even being that careful about no chit chatting, like whatever. Um, so the key there is that just to understand, like it's a small investment to avoid those simple mistakes that can seem simple, but they can add up. So it's kind of like an insurance policy, right? Like it's overall, it's kind of a small cost, but it can prevent you from it can prevent the really bad things from happening. Although I guess that's not really, insurance doesn't prevent the bad things from happening, but it kind of helps you handle them when they do, right? Whereas the huddle is to actually help prevent certain things from just going off the rails. And it can be really good. It's also good for kind of cross training on certain topics, because you also want to avoid the case where you've got all your knowledge like really siloed in your team, right? Where you've got like maybe you got a couple of senior engineers and they're kind of the experts in their own domains, and they just kind of work on their own most of the time, and they're not really sharing that knowledge, right? Um, if that's how things go in your team, it's difficult for the junior engineers to level up and become more competent, so that you can more easily have them doing the more sophisticated work and and put them into more senior positions.
So,
Whereas,
Matt, I'm going to interrupt you real quick.
yeah,
So,
of course.
my retort to the first part about employees and spending too much time, every ticket should have a budget. How long we think the ticket's going to take, right? So, if they've hit over that, they need, and we have an internal policy like stop. Like that's when you reach out. And so, what would you say to that?
I'd say that is a good practice. Definitely, that's a good practice, and the having a huddle in the morning or whenever it is, but typically it's in the morning, that can be an even better practice when combined with what you said. Because why should we wait until someone actually hits that budget before they ask for help? Why not? Yeah, maybe if they've gotten to half the budget and they're like, I've gotten to half the budget on this ticket and I think I'm probably not halfway done. I think I'm not getting something. And if they can say that when they're halfway to the budget, isn't that so much better than saying that finally when they use up all the budget?
Yeah. So
So
would they wait till the next day to have it? Because sometimes you don't know that until you're actually in the ticket.
yeah, absolutely. And the best case, no, is that they ask that whenever they see whenever they perceive that then maybe things aren't going according to plan, right? That's the best case. But
Yeah, they're being
um,
proactive.
I'm I'm we're trying to just acknowledge that people aren't perfect, right? And a lot of junior engineers, especially, like they don't want to bother a senior engineer, right? They don't want to be the people that are just always asking for help, and so they may indeed um just wait and not ask unless they get to some point in the day when like this is a time when everybody like when you should bring these things up if you haven't already. And
Gotcha.
and also it's okay to like maybe not every team would do this, but it's totally okay if what your practice in your team is if something's not necessarily say a ticket is not necessarily time constrained. They could maybe they use up half the budget on a ticket and they're like, I don't think I'm on the right track. I'm just going to set this aside and work on the next thing. Um, but I'm not going to ask about that right at the moment so that I can kind of batch up all my questions for the next call.
Okay.
And then they can bring those troubles to the team all at once.
Okay.
And that's a little bit more efficient. Now, I mean, I'm not saying that that's the only way to do it, but that's one way to do it. I'm just trying to help you see some of the reasons that
Sure.
huddles have become widely used.
Yeah.
Certainly, there's
I
more
have a
than one
few
way
other
to do it.
questions, so we don't have to belabor that. But if anyone else wants to chime in about daily meetings before I ask the next question,
Now, go ahead, Justin.
Jeopardy. I always play the Jeopardy in my head to wait that 15, 20 seconds. And then after that, no, I get to keep going.
Go ahead.
Project views and or really service boards. So you talk about boards and swim lanes and stuff like that. What we've done is basically created views on boards. I'm sure you know what I mean by that, for certain things like you're talking about the different queues and whatnot. Um, what would you say to that? You like that idea? Don't like the idea?
Sure. Sorry. Just could you remind me, Justin, are you using ConnectWise or AutoTask?
I'm ConnectWise.
ConnectWise. Okay. And just restate your question.
So we don't use TopLeft. We use ConnectWise. We do try to do Agile. Uh, what we do is we create views. So like there'll be a view for new, and there's a whole set of metrics around that. So when people need to know what new tickets have come in, they go to that view within a board or certain boards, and that's how they know how to pick up tickets.
Mm-hmm.
So like there's a view for new, view for we call it pre-process, but in your world, call it ready. That means it's been triage, etc. Um, there's not really one for schedule because it's already scheduled in the future. Um, so I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So it sounds like you've done a decent job of making those sorts of views. Um, one one thing to keep in mind with that is that um, it's it is advantageous to your team if they can get that sort of view all in one place. So that they have basically like one place where they can do most of the work, or I mean, ideally all of the work throughout the day from one place. So whether that's like working on a specific ticket, like actually doing the work for the ticket, entering their time and reviewing the notes and so on, and then going to check on what work is new, kind of even dispatching it to themselves, and uh, seeing what's scheduled or seeing what's waiting or seeing what a customer has responded to. Just being able to have a single view for that is pretty effective. It's powerful, and it helps the engineers work more effectively throughout the day. Now, in TopLeft, even if you're using TopLeft, sometimes there is a need to have different boards for different purposes. But we do overall try to minimize that. But what you've done in ConnectWise is kind of the best you can do with what ConnectWise gives you, in that you've made a view for the specific purposes that an engineer would have throughout the day, or dispatching or whatever it is that people are doing. And it just means that you have to be your people have to be in a distinct mode as they go throughout the day. They're in different modes at different times. One mode is completing a ticket, another mode is completing like finding out what's the next ticket to do, and so on. And so if that's just kind of jumping through various views in ConnectWise, that just slows them down bit by bit throughout the day, and that can add up over time. So that's why we built TopLeft. That's why we still use it in our teams, and that's why one of the reasons that other MSPs like it now. I mean, among many other reasons too. Like another example is too that you really can't do. There are a number of things that you can't do at all in ConnectWise, like the work in progress limits, the specific warnings for when a ticket has been in a certain status for too long, and things like that. Or like I had mentioned briefly, like dragging a ticket from one swim lane to the next to reassign
Sure.
it. Those are
Yeah,
things
adhering to
that
the principles of Agile, though, obviously that's a function, or what you just said is a function feature of TopLeft. So again, I don't have it. So you can talk about it. It sounds great. It looks great. And it's something that we'll definitely look into. So, I'm just thinking about, like, right now how we apply some of the stuff that we'll talk about today and over the next couple of sessions, to our work, to our flow. You mentioned having good documentation. Couldn't agree more. I even find with good documentation, things still don't happen. So I can't even imagine not having good documentation. One thing that I'm trying to work on right now is specifically a workflow, like a diagram. I think that visualization would really help people understand, especially like these cues, the different, how it goes from you basically start to finish, right? As far as uh, from new to completed, let's just say.
yeah.
Curious, as part of this, do y'all have templates that we can use?
Like templates for a diagram of how that would work?
Diagram and or the actual, like, you said documentation is king, is important. So I was wondering if there was a boilerplate template that y'all will provide, or it's really just up to everyone to create that.
Yeah, I don't know. We don't have anything like that I'm aware of. And part of the reason that we haven't done that is just because we emphasize just keeping it really, really simple. Like ideally, you should, suppose you're looking at a Kanban board, the tickets should just go from left on the board, uh, you know, column by column to the right. I mean, and they might even skip some of the columns because maybe you skip waiting or you skip scheduled or whatever like it.
So
So
what does simple look like to you? Like, what is your actual, like, I'm not going to copy it. I'm just curious how simple, because mine's super complicated. Mine literally talks about every status and what could happen, and all these minutia, and it just gets confusing, I'm sure. In fact, people have told me it's just too much information. So I'm trying to think of a way to compress it down, but still capture nuance.
yeah, well, I think it's definitely something like if I was going to do something like that, I think that I could put it on half of a typical page.
Wow.
because it would mainly just be going from, new to, or like, what do you call it, pre-process or whatever, um, ready, in progress. Uh, I would want to comment on like scheduled and waiting, and then complete. And some teams have some additional statuses too. Like maybe they have some stuff that's related, like a manager reviews a ticket before it finally goes to complete. That's fine. Not every team does that, but some do. And if they do, then that would be important to do that. Um, the but we're not talking about like a lot of statuses, and you wouldn't, I think, need to document all the minutia about like all of the different waiting statuses you have. Like some people have like 5 or 6 different types of waiting statuses, but they're all substantially the same. It all just means that you're waiting on somebody outside of the team.
Mm-hmm.
So you go ahead and maybe list them, but you don't need to just describe much about all the differences between the weightings. Like the name should make it clear enough.
Like
I
if
might,
it's new, and then obviously there's like a triage checklist. You want to triage the ticket. So, like obviously we don't have that on that same document, but it links to the triage checklist, right?
okay,
Like this is what you do. And
yeah,
so when you start adding all that stuff, I guess, as an example, and if you want to see, I can, maybe it's better. No, it's not today. Um, that's where again, I think it starts new people, existing people, if they're not adhering to our process, procedures, protocols, I can point them to this document and say, hey, this is how we do certain things.
yeah. Well, you know what? Even just keeping it in a separate place and linking to it I think that's a great technique. I do that myself quite a bit, because that means that for any particular person who needs to learn this system, they can really easily limit themselves to just focus on the particular of what they need to know at the time. So if they're just an engineer and they're just working through the tickets and they don't need to worry about the dispatch stuff, they don't have to go and review the dispatch stuff, and it shouldn't be overwhelming for them. So I would say, like, I don't know your exact case. I mean, if you've been getting the feedback that it's too much for people, then I don't know, you can evaluate that. But I think, um, I having pretty clear details about the key parts of a system is very critical, especially if you can do what you've already done, where like kind of encapsulate some of the complexity in a certain place so that it can be ignored by the people who don't need to know that, and just make sure it's totally clear to everybody to say, what, you don't need to know about the dispatch stuff. So yeah, it is a page that you need to know if you're doing that, but you're not doing that, so you don't need to read that. Don't worry about that part yet. And I think that's fine. I have seen some people do some pretty complex documentation about all that sort of stuff. Uh, like, how many engineers in your MSP or in the teams that you
There's
work with?
4 of us.
Four.
There's
Okay.
4 engineers, 5 people total.
Okay. So that's a small team.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if I was running a team like that, based on what I've seen, I definitely document something. But if I was going to print it out, I don't think it need to be more than 3 pages, just to kind of pick a number. Like if you got 4 engineers or 5 engineers and you got a 20-page document, it's probably more detail than you need. But you 4 or 5 people, that's also not tiny, so you might need more than 1 page.
Okay, so like the new, hey, y'all need to pick up tickets within X amount of time. This is where you go to look at new tickets. So that kind of nuance is what I'm trying to capture, but yet not overcomplicate. So, that that's just a good example.
Yeah, definitely the standards for the timing of what are the expectations for how fast a ticket gets picked up
Yeah, you
is
start adding
is
all
in
that
there.
stuff. That's what I've done over time. We've been doing this since 2005, and that's where for me it's a super easy old hat. Why can't everybody do it very well? Versus, new people are like, I didn't know that, or even though they've gone through training, they've gone through onboarding, and all that stuff is, you know, they're supposed to read all that information, but is it too much? Are they supposed to even retain all that information and be able to regurgitate it and know exactly what to do? So that's just something I struggle with.
Yeah, and I think that's not unusual. It's something that everybody struggles with a little bit, I think. At the beginning, with new people coming on board, you know, some people are maybe they weren't maybe expecting that there's that much process in a team, but there is if you want to run your team in an excellent way.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. You don't want to put too much detail in there and overwhelm them. You know, like in terms of the SLAs, sometimes it's better to not. Sometimes in a document like that, it's better to not put in the exact numbers, you know, like such and such minutes for this SLA, but to just say, hey, here's where you can go and find the SLAs in ConnectWise. You know, click here and here and here and here to get to the SLAs. And then someone who actually needs to know the specifics will be able to find them. But usually you know, ConnectWise should be able to print, you know, like list beside the ticket, you know, hey, there's such and such remaining in the SLA. So you don't really need to worry about it. I mean, TopLeft can definitely do that. It can say there's 35 minutes left in the SLA. So someone doesn't need to actually remember it or even know where it comes from, because the software should just tell you what the standard is. What's the expectation for
Well,
you?
what happened recently, I had a technician, he says, hey, there's this ticket. It's been in the new status for 4 hours. Basically, like, what the heck, guys? Why haven't we looked at it, picked it up? And I'm just thinking, where did you get this number from? Like, what is the SLA? Like, what is the expectation? Because 4 hours is not terrible for a ticket to sit there. So, you know, that's where I start to like define all of these, again, nuance, minutia, to kind of avoid, I guess, questions, and more importantly, to clarify. So documentation's fun.
Yeah. Good.
I think one of the
Well,
other problems that I've always done is uh, I now we go by the diataxis framework or model. And so whereas before are you familiar with that?
I don't think I've heard of that one.
It's
No.
DIATAXIS. And it's basically like what documentation is. There's 4 categories. And definitely, like most people, we're just putting a lot of information in one document. And after reading and understanding the diataxis method, where different documents are trying to do different things, right? One's training someone, maybe one's a checklist, one's a reference, and if you differentiate those, then it makes it much easier for the person to find what they're looking for and understand what they're looking for.
Yeah.
So it has different audience. I was like, oh, well, that makes sense.
Okay. You know what? I have not that long ago seen something a lot like that. It wasn't under that name, but maybe it had some of the same. It sounds like it had some of the same ideas behind it, because it was definitely about like, hey, you gotta know what your reader's audience is. Even in, you know, your technicians, they are gonna they want to come with a certain outcome, right? And sometimes the outcome they want is to know, I know I forgot what the SLA was, and I need to remind myself what the particular SLA is, right? Which is a different outcome that they might want from a different time, where they're like, you know what, I actually want to know better about how we do this certain sort of thing
Yeah.
more thoroughly, and that's kind of more of a reference, whatever, right? So even in a small team like that, your people are going to have different outcomes that they want at different times. And so writing those documents with that in mind will help them a lot. Because you're
Yeah.
right, a document should have one audience or one mindset in mind as it's written.
Well, I've read the Phoenix Project. I like the Agile method. Like I said, we got rid of our dispatcher, and so I'm looking to really tweak how we use it, what how we're implementing it. Um, so yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good stuff. Yeah, I look forward to having you on again next time and try out some of those things that you can, and I'd love to hear how it's working out.
Okay, okay. And where the homework was where?
Just to, well, so if you're not using TopLeft and then reviewing your TopLeft boards, stuff doesn't apply, obviously, but just the other one I mentioned was consider your daily huddles. So you might want to start that.
Yep, yep. Who does those? Like who does it matter who leads them? Or does anyone specific, or is it kind of agile method where everyone's kind of just participating and there's no one necessarily in charge?
Well, Agile doesn't mean that there's nobody in charge. There definitely should be somebody who everybody knows is responsible for keeping the meeting on track. It doesn't necessarily have to be the leader of the team, although typically it would be um, in environments that I've seen. So uh, that could be you, and so
Yeah, I don't
um,
want to do it. Like I don't want to like tag not it, like I do have a service person slash, she kind of wears a lot of hats. So I'm thinking about her. It could be just like a senior tech. That's why I was asking that question. Like I'm not going to do it if it's up to me to join and lead, and that just
yeah,
sounds terrible.
sure, yeah. I mean, it's got to be somebody who's going to be there every day, right? And if as the owner or whatever, are not there, not running the day-to-day things, then it shouldn't be you, because it does have to be somebody who's expected to be there 90% of the time. Um, but it really, I think, is better if it's somebody who's actually really engaged for the success of the team and has a respect of the team, so that they um, will actually listen to them when they say, so and so. That's a little too much detail. Let's take that offline after the meeting.
Okay, sounds
Not just
good.
a junior person saying that, they won't really
Yeah,
know
exactly.
when it is, or feel like they actually have the authority to say that and be respected.
Exactly.
Okay. Great. Well, yeah, thanks for joining us. And yeah, if you can try the huddle, even if it's just once or twice, I'd love to hear how it goes.
Okay. And it's next week is the next one, right?
Next week. Yeah.